Hello, boys and girls, and welcome to Bee Mom. We're putting this story in our playlist called Books on Bee Mom. It is the story of Tootle, which is another little golden book. I read one way earlier last year. This is a story by Gertrude Crampton, and the pictures are by Tibor Gurgly. Isn't that a silly name? Maybe it's Jurgly. Anyway, so there you go. Tootle. Far, far to the west of everywhere is the village of Lower Trainswich. All of the baby locomotives go to learn to be big locomotives. The young locomotives steam up and down the tracks and try to call out the long, sad toot of the big locomotives. But the best they can do is a little tootle. Lower Trainswich has a fine school for engines. There are lessons in whistle blowing, stopping for a waving red flag, puffing loudly when starting, coming around curves safely, screeching when stopping, and clicking and clacking over the rails. There's a little train. And there's a little train learning to be a big train. Of all the things that are taught in the Lower Trainswich School for Locomotives, the most important is, of course, staying on the rails, no matter what. And that's what he has on the chalkboard, staying on the rails no matter what. And he's teaching very carefully. The head of the school is an old engineer named Bill. Bill always tells the new locomotives that he would not be angry if they sometimes spilled the soup pulling the diner, or if they would turn the milk to butter now and then. But they would never be good trains unless they got 100% A+ in staying on the rails, no matter what. All the baby engines work very hard to get 100% A+. They want to stay on the rails, no matter what. After a few weeks, not one of the engines in the Lower Trainswich School for Trains would even think of getting off the rails. No matter what. One day, a new locomotive named Tootle came to school. "Here's the finest baby I have seen since old 600, thought Bill, and he patted the gleaming young locomotive and said, "How would you like to grow up to be the flyer between New York and Chicago?" "If a flyer goes very fast, then I should like to be one," Tootle answered. "I love to go fast. Watch it." That's the flyer from New York to Chicago. And there's Bill talking to Tootle. He raced all around the roundhouse. "Good, good," said Bill. "You must study whistle blowing, puffing loudly when starting, stopping for the red flag waving, and pulling the diner without spilling the soup." There he is in the roundhouse. See him? Dashing round the roundhouse. But most of all, you must study staying on the rails no matter what. Remember that you can't be a flyer unless you get 100% A+ in staying on the rails. Tootle promised that he would remember and would work very hard. He did too. He even worked hard at stopping for a red flag waving. Tootle did not like those lessons at all. There is nothing a locomotive hates more than stopping. But Bill said that no locomotive ever kept going when he saw a red flag waving. One day, while Tootle was practicing for his lessons on staying on the rails no matter what, a dreadful thing happened. He looked across the meadow he was running through and saw a fine, strong black horse. "Raced you to the river," shouted the black horse, kicking up his heels. Away he went, the black tail streaming out behind him and the mane tossing in the wind. Oh, how he could run! "Here I go," said Tootle to himself. "If I'm going to be a flyer, I can't let a horse beat me," he puffed. "Everyone at school will laugh at me." His wheels turned so fast that they were silver streaks, and the cars lurched and bumped together, and just as Tootle was sure he could win, the tracks made a great curve. "Oh, whistle!" cried Tootle. "That horse will beat me now. He'll run straight while I take the great curve." Then the dreadful thing happened. After all that Bill had said about staying on the rails no matter what, Tootle jumped off the tracks and raced alongside the black horse. The race ended in a tie. Both Tootle and the black horse were happy, and they stood at the bank of the river and talked. "It's nice here in the middle," said Tootle. And when Tootle got back to school, he said nothing about leaving the rails, but he thought about it that night in the roundhouse. "Tomorrow I will work hard," decided Tootle. "I will not even think about leaving the rails no matter what." And he did work hard. And he practiced tootling so much that the mayor himself ran up the hill with his green coattails flapping and said that everyone in the village had a headache and would he please stop tootling. So Tootle was sent to practice staying on the rails no matter what. There's the black horse. And there's Tootle thinking about trying to be good. Let's find out what happens. As he came to the great curve, Tootle looked across the meadow. It was full of buttercups. "It's like a big yellow carpet. How I should like to play in them and hold them under my searchlight and see if I like butter. But no, I'm going to be a flyer. I must practice staying on the rails no matter what." Tootle clicked and clacked round the great curve, and his wheels began to say over and over again, "Do you like butter? Do you? Do you like butter? Do you? Do you like butter? Do you?" "I don't know," said Tootle crossly, "but I'm going to find out." And he stopped much faster than any good flyer has ever done, unless stopping for a waving red flag. And he hopped off the tracks, and he bumped along the meadow to the yellow buttercups. "What fun!" said Tootle, and he danced around and round, and he held one of the buttercups under his searchlight. "I do like butter," cried Tootle, "I do." And at last the sun began to go down, and it was time to hurry to the roundhouse. That evening, while Chief Oiler was playing checkers with old Bill, he said, "It's a strange thing, very strange, but I found grass between Tootle's front wheels today." Said Bill. "There must be grass growing on the tracks." "Not on our tracks," said the day watchman, who spent his days watching the tracks and his nights watching Bill and Chief Oiler play checkers. Bill's face was stern. Tootle knows he must get 100% A+ in staying on the rails no matter what if he's going to be a flyer. There's a little red flag picture. And there they are, playing checkers, talking about the day. The next day, Tootle played all day in the meadow. He watched a green frog, and he made a daisy chain, and he found a rain barrel, and he said softly, "Toot, toot!" shouted the barrel. "Why, I sound like a flyer already," cried Tootle. And that night, the first assistant oiler said that he had found a daisy in Tootle's bell. And the day after that, the second assistant oiler said that he had found hollyhock flowers floating in Tootle's 8 bowls of soup. My goodness. And then the mayor himself said that he had seen Tootle chasing butterflies in the meadow, and the mayor himself said that Tootle had looked silly too. Early one morning, Bill had a long talk with the mayor himself. And when the mayor himself left the Lower Train Switch School for Locomotives, he laughed all the way to the village. Bill's plan will surely put Tootle back on the track, he chuckled. Bill ran from one store to the next, buying 10 yards of this and 20 yards of that, and all you have of the other. And the chief oiler and the first and second and third assistant oilers were hammering and sawing instead of oiling and polishing. And Tootle? Well, Tootle was in the meadow, watching the butterflies flying and wishing he could dip and soar as they did. There's the mayor watching Tootle be silly in the meadow. And there's Tootle being silly in the meadow. Not a store in Lower Train Switch was open the next day, and not a person was at home. By the time the sun came up, every villager was hiding in the meadow along the tracks, and each of them had a red flag. And they had taken all the red goods in Lower Train Switch and the hard work by the oilers, and there was a red flag for everyone. Soon Tootle came tootling happily down the tracks, and when he came to the meadow, he hopped off the tracks and rolled along the grass. Just as he was thinking it was a beautiful day, a red flag poked up from the grass and waved hard. Tootle stopped, for every locomotive knows he must stop for a waving red flag. I'll go another way, said Tootle. There's all the villagers heading down to the meadow. And Tootle on his way. He turned to the left, and up came another waving red flag, this time in the middle of the buttercups. He went to the right, and there was another red flag. There were red flags waving from the buttercups, in the daisies, under the trees, near the bluebirds' nests, and even one behind the rain barrel. And of course, Tootle had to stop for each one. And a locomotive must always stop for a waving red flag. Red flags, muttered Tootles. This meadow is full of red flags. How can I have any fun? Whenever I start, I have to stop. Why did I think this meadow was a fine place? Why don't I ever see a green flag? And just as tears were riding down to slide out of his boiler, Tootle happened to look back over his coal car. And on the tracks stood Bill, and in his hand was a big green flag. Oh, said Tootle. He puffed up to Bill and stopped. This is the place for me, said Tootle. There's nothing but red flags for locomotives that get off the tracks. Hooray, shouted the people of Lower Train Switch and jumped up from their hiding places. Hooray for Tootle the Flyer. Now Tootle was a famous 2 miles a minute flyer, and the young flyer listened to his advice. Work hard, he tells them. Always remember to stop for a waving red flag, but most of all, stay on the rails, no matter what. And there is sad Tootle with all the red flags. And there is Tootle doing the right thing and being cheered on. The end. I hope you like this, boys and girls. A little bit before this, I sent a message to your parents about a couple of changes. And so if you're having fun with these stories, please tell your moms and dads to subscribe and tell them to like this video for you. And in the one I put before this, they can put comments about things that you might like me to read or stories that you've heard. I had a couple of people tell me about some things, and so I'm going to go to the library and check out a couple of books and see what they are, and then we'll read those. And I'm very excited. And thanks for joining me, boys and girls.